So what is this we're doing here?
So I know, right?
This is interesting.
So what we're doing is, I feel like most people don't have an opportunity to talk about transition out of baseball. And I feel like there's a processing involved that most baseball players don't do. I also think like it's a conversation nobody's really had, and so I thought it'd be interesting to talk to guys that were doing stuff that's kind of cool out after baseball, and what they're doing, but also like what the transition has been like. Like, was it hard? Was it easy? Some people it's easy. Like some people it's like, oh, what, it's over and move on. But the conversation with Zach was awesome. He was, he's to this day feels the pull of spring training. Another buddy of mine kind of had the, was going to play. It was all set up, and then boom, rug swept down. And you could tell we're having this talk the other day, and he's still not over it. And so,
yeah,
Megan's she's an MSW, master's social work. She's always talking about how, both military, and she thinks athletes to a degree aren't really able to re-acclimatize to society. And so, you have these weird time frames. You're on a like kind of a schedule where you're gone in the spring, you're home in this, and like there's these beats that you don't necessarily get, but you're not, when it's done, but you're not ready for that. Most aren't. So that was kind of the framework of this conversation of, what it's been like for you. So.
Yeah, so I just get to sit here and talk about myself.
100%. Yeah, you just that's. I
Cool.
am very much here to set it up and make it look good. Yeah,
great.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear about my act.
This will be my easiest call of the week.
Yeah,
I like it.
Very good. All right, so we'll get started. So hey, seriously though, the last time I think I saw you was DC, right? 2008.
I have no idea.
I know. I
believe you.
Sad to say, you came by the house. We were both playing in Maryland.
Okay.
And you were very much still kind of in the organized baseball world, and I was on the outs as an independent guy.
But I remember now.
Yeah, we were in that big house. General Omar Bradley. Somehow we're house sitting this, 12,000 square foot house in the middle of Northwest DC. So one of the few perks of that season. But I remember you coming by, and you were still in the mix. You were very much in a prospect still, and where did it go from there?
Yeah, I mean, that was 2008. 2007 was the year I got injured. I missed most of that season with a labrum tear in my shoulder. So that was probably the beginning of the end, which is even before the time that you and I met up and hung out in DC. I think that injury was probably the first time it was like a slap to the face of like, what are you doing with your life? And maybe this is hindsight wisdom, but it made me start thinking about taking control over the decisions I make as to where I'm going to live, what I'm going to try to get better at, what I'm going to pursue, all of the things that baseball was not providing for me. Yeah. I was drafted by one team and played with three other organizations, traded twice, you moved up and moved down. And everything felt a bit like a conveyor belt. And so that injury, I think, was the beginning of thinking about, hey, I have a chance to think about what I want to do with my life, and take ownership of it, and probably work on something where I get better as I get older rather than get, deteriorate.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, I think in that transition, with that injury and thinking about what to do after that, I owe a lot of gratitude to Zach, to Zach's mother, Mona, allowing me to live with them, allowing me to meet, their friends, colleagues, confidants, to begin working on things that, brought me back to school a little bit for reading and writing, working in politics, in government, working with lobbyists and lawyers. And I did a lot of that in 2007. That was really the lead up to the 2008 election. And it made me realize, what I probably am not going to be playing baseball, for too much longer. I will leave the game likely before I'm finished with my ability to pitch. So in 2008, if I have any sort of regrets, it's that I went back and played that year in 2008. I had a fine season. I had fine stuff, so I had a fine season. I played in Double-A. Went back to Frederick where I was rehabbing. Played in Double-A in Bowie, Maryland. But I just knew I was not going to be playing that much longer. I got released in 2008 by the Orioles and picked up the next day by the Blue Jays. Played a month with the Blue Jays, and I was finished. I went back to Austin and began working with Mona and her folks again as I sort of prepared for going back to school. 2009, I went back to Nebraska to finish my undergraduate degree, took the LSAT. And in 2010, I started law school in Chicago. So I guess I getting injured, blessing and a curse, as they say. It got me really thinking about ways to get to where I am now, and I'm really pleased with where I am now.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something interesting on my end, is that everybody thinks that professional athletes have a ton of control over the career, and you spoke earlier on, you really don't. I mean, like you said, you're released, you're traded, you're promoted, you're demoted, all those things, and you're kind of told every step along the way, at least in the early stages of what your career is going to look like, and then it's kind of interesting to think about. Well, no, I really don't have to do that. So if I'm not playing baseball, I can choose. I can go to school. I can pick a career that, like you said, you can improve upon versus deteriorate physically. And so, what was that like? Being able to finally have some freedom to say, this is actually what I want to do.
Yeah, it was the scariest time of my life, no doubt. Because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I was good at. I didn't know what it meant to be good at something. In a way that isn't sort of like measured by an ERA, right? I was no less openly gay then, but I started pursuing things as a gay person, thinking about, could I be in a relationship? Do I want to have relationships? That I just hadn't really thought about before, and I no longer had the excuse of I'm limited in my ability to pursue those things. Yeah. And so it was scary. I knew that if I was leaving baseball, I was going to be seeking a real world job where, I'd have to do something for at least 8 hours a day. I had never done anything for 8 hours a day. I'd never sat still so often in a day, and I had never gone so many days in a row without an adrenaline rush that you get from playing sports. So it was very scary. But there's this beautiful Spanish phrase that I won't try and butcher the pronunciation, but it's really just sort of like you run away forward. Nice. And that's kind of what I think that I did in going back to Nebraska, finishing my degree, sitting for the LSAT, just going back to school. I wanted to put myself on a path where I just really needed to focus and make it worth my while. Because otherwise, without focus, I was just going to get confused. I was going to get scared. I didn't know what the next step was ever going to be. So yeah, it was very scary. But it's worked out for me so far. I like where I went to law school. And I like what I'm doing now. So yeah, I like to say I don't really know what I'm doing, but I do it anyway. Yeah. So it's working out.
And so you go from you were a closer, you were a setup man. Your concentration levels at about 10 out of 10 for 20, 30 minutes to now, in theory, you're supposed to be 10 out of 10 for 8 hours. how's that transition been? I mean, I think that's something that I still to this day haven't got to. I'm still coaching baseball. I'm still around the game. There's kind of a flow to the day, and like you said, you really ramp up at certain times. But I'd imagine the 8 hours a day, you got to be pretty locked in.
Yeah, it's a different approach. One of the things I really struggled with when I was at a law firm, I worked at a law firm in Chicago and New York for 5 years. I hated having an office. I had this big fancy thing in the sky, and I'm like, this is terrible. It's like a fly trapped in a jar.
Yeah. So
I really had a hard time with that. For that reason, I pursued a practice area where it allowed me to travel a lot, an unreasonable amount of travel, just simply because that was the way I had to cope with it. I had to break up the monotony. And now my job is anything but monotonous. I'm sort of going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. I'm always on the phone. So I'm still sort of seeking out, these high energy, frenetic type of work, because that is really what I'm used to. That's how I sort of cut my teeth as a worker, as an athlete. So I think now I'm just one of these employees who needs an ADHD type of role.
Yeah.
And I still do have it. And then I also really benefit from, this sort of learning and motivation technique called the Pomodoro technique. And this is really just like you set a timer for like 20 minutes and you see how much can you get done in the next 20 minutes without interruption, and then stop, and then like get up, walk around, stretch, do whatever you need to do, like force yourself to break it up. And that just really works for me.
And go out for the second inning.
And then go out for, and it is hopefully I don't have to I was one of these people who hated pitching, sitting down and pitching again.
Yeah.
So I try to avoid that sort of terminology, the second inning. But yeah, it is the same sort of mindset, like cool your head, regroup, and then get back in it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, so I always go back to, I had a good buddy, played with the Diamondbacks, and somehow it was after my experience with the Rockies, and your name came up, and he's like, "Oh, Burch, man, that is probably the nastiest slider I've ever seen in baseball." And then I go back to your time staying with us for a little bit, and you have agents sending limos to the house. So
that was hilarious.
There was, right? Yeah. So what was that like for you? I mean, when you're in that mode, do you think I'm pitching in the big leagues next year? Like, what was the headspace like during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I have to think I operated in much more of a cloud at that time than I do now. So what was it like? I don't know. I don't mean to suggest I had a sense of entitlement about it, but it just seemed to me like this is things that kind of happen.
Yeah.
If this company, this agent has an interest in me as an asset, you might have to overpay for it at the beginning. That's just part of an auction.
Yeah.
And so I guess I just sort of interpreted the goings on as not even really specific to me. This was just sort of how someone in, an Adam Katz's position, or, Beverly Hills representation and whatever they were called.
Sports Counsel.
This is what this is what they do.
Yeah.
They send a car. And that to me that just meant, no, this is what it means to be in professional athletics.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is sort of premiums paid here, luxuries observed there, simply because that is just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, it was interesting around our house. I mean, all of a sudden, we're like, oh yeah, I know Jason's got a meeting today, and then a limo shows up. We're like, oh wow. My mom to this day will say, hey, do you know Jason had a limo sent for him? And then it becomes, hey Keith, no limos were ever sent for you. What does that mean? Well, I didn't have quite the slider he did, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. That's just another example. Like people talk about, I also got traded for Larry Walker.
Yeah.
I had a limo sent for me. Unfortunately, those were the highlights of my career. It's not like I look back on them too favorably because, I would have liked to have pitched in the major leagues. Part of what I think I realized around that time is that's really all I wanted to do was like having pitched in the major leagues was the goal. I didn't necessarily want to be a Major League Baseball player, as sort of my vocation. But I wasn't really thinking that broadly then. I was just really on the conveyor belt, in a sense.
And so was that a goal since you were a little guy? I mean, when did that start?
Yeah, I guess it started when, someone came to my parents and said, your son should move to a new high school.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And that was sort of the beginning, I think, of me and my family thinking about, certain needs can be met by reason of my athletic abilities. But again, not a dream of mine to pitch in the major leagues. It was a dream of mine to get an A on the test. Yeah. And so that meant, doing really well in high school, going to a good college with a good team, trying to get drafted, trying to get the next person out. Again, conveyor belt. I never really thought about like being a major leaguer in a day-to-day sense. Like, sure, I would love to have been Mariano Rivera, finishing games, and that looks awesome.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about Mariano Rivera's life when he goes home and whether I wanted that. Yeah. So it was a different sort of dream. It was more, I was just looking to achieve.
And when do you think that transitioned into where you are now? Like, as far as like your dream changing, was that 2008 when you're going through all your your different educational processes?
Yeah. I mean, changing to what? Recognizing that I don't want to pursue this achievement anymore.
Exactly. That maybe baseball's not for you and that you can move on.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in 2007, the haziest part of my thinking was whether or not to continue.
Yeah.
Because, I was injured. I recognized that, even a great career on this shoulder at this stage is not going to be a very long one. I'm going to be a young man even when I'm done playing. I had a lot of confused and confusing thoughts about whether I wanted to continue. And certainly during 2008, when I sort of recognized that my heart wasn't in it and I was always sort of elsewhere and I was much more interested in learning, I began to think, maybe I don't even really want to do this. And then certainly getting released and feeling as though that was a weight off my shoulders was certainly an awakening that this is not something I'm trying to see to completion anymore. I should find something else.
Yeah, and that's so interesting for me because I got released in 2005, and for me, it was the exact opposite of a weight off my shoulders. It was like an extreme weight on my shoulders, and it's like, how do we get back to just to organized baseball and going from AA back to single A? But how do we get back to? I mean, it's interesting to hear the side of the weight is off because that's the complete opposite of the feeling I had. I'm calling my parents. It's agent. Everybody's devastated. You think you're on this path to glory in the big leagues, and I'd say that a lot of what you say is very true on my end too. Of I just wanted to say I pitched in the big. I mean, I wanted to have 10 years. Don't get me wrong, but even just saying, hey, I got a couple guys out in the big leagues. There's this almost like achievement factor with I can say I'm in the club. And that's one thing when I look back now, it's something I always have to kind of arbitrate a little bit of like, it didn't get there, and just have to kind of accept it. So.
Yeah, I get that. You always struck me as much more committed to playing baseball than I was. I sort of admired that. And you and Zach too, is that it doesn't surprise me to hear you say that, Zach Parker also always has that pull for spring training.
Yeah.
Because much more committed to doing the baseball thing than I think I ever was. I have to admit.
Yeah. Well, you had great stuff. I mean, that was always the thing we'd always hear about. I'd watch you play catch, and we'd play catch together and getting ready for spring training or whatever it may be, and I'd see your slider, and I'd be like, oh my gosh. And then the sinker's going the other way, and it's a lot harder than I'm throwing and a lot more imposing. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. All right, here we go. I got to somehow compete with this guy like that. That ain't happening.
It's sort of weird though. I didn't, it's weird being an athlete, right? I didn't like learn the stuff.
Yeah.
I was born with crooked arms. Surely that helps in some way.
Exactly.
I didn't learn any special type of slider. I didn't work particularly hard on my slider or a changeup or a sinker. I just threw weird.
Yeah.
I guess I really liked figuring out ways to sort of consistently throw this weird thing.
Yeah.
But it's sort of funny how that's sort of that can put someone a cut above, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, it's all right. So what's life like now? You're regulatory counsel with Uber in New York. I mean, tell me about your life now. It's without baseball.
Yeah, without baseball. What is my life like now? I don't know. I guess there are days where I feel like I'm living a dream. And there are days where I wonder what the hell am I doing? What is work, especially during this sort of COVID work from home quarantine? Like, what value especially if you work at a law firm for a while, it's like I don't make anything. The only thing I make is sure.
Yeah.
I make certain, and I get paid for it somehow, some way. And apparently that contributes to the GDP. And so, whereas, as an athlete, people were asking for my autograph all the time. I made the ERA comment. I had this sort of, this real life feedback as to how things are going. I had this sort of mano-a-mano challenge daily. I was exercising my mind, exercising my body. 0.01% of all people who can do this. Whereas now I'm just another. Surely the world doesn't need another lawyer. I really like my job. I really, really like my job.
That's awesome.
It's now, and by and large, we're a large public company now, and so much of what I do is just sort of large public company work, and making sure, yet again, getting on phone calls and doing my best to answer questions without saying anything at all, is what I do. But at the same time, I'm in love with someone who is passionate and unpredictable, and sort of challenges me every day. I have a really good dog. I live in downtown New York City, which is a dream for me. I have a minivan. I can go upstate, to Woodstock. My drug use is 5-star, in a good way, in sort of like a healthy way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm having a lot of fun.
Good.
I'm having a lot of fun.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's much different. You hit on something. So when I was playing, it was so much focus on making sure everything was just so. And then now it's like, oh, didn't sleep well last night. It's all good. Have some coffee.
Yeah.
We're okay. No bus ride to worry about. No, 50 people screaming in the hotel. And it's just a different rhythm to life that you think there are times you totally miss it, and there are other times it's like, this is kind of nice. But that's.
I remember one day I was texting with. This is just such like a 2020 like fucking ESPN sports writer. I was texting with so and so. I was texting with my buddy Tony Watson.
Okay.
Left-handed pitcher with the Giants now. Went to Nebraska.
Yeah.
Consummate professional, great guy. And he was texting one day. This was a couple of years ago because it was a rain delay, and he was just hanging out in the clubhouse because it was a rain delay.
Yeah. And
I responded to him. I was like, "Rain has no bearing on what I do." And and it is sort of funny how, as an athlete, there are these. You were talking about things being just so, and the bus ride. There are all these variables that are completely irrelevant to performing the specialized skill you are paid to perform that you just sort of have to overcome, that you just sort of have to put up with. And, fucking COVID, a pandemic is another great, great example. So like suddenly, okay, we can't get together. And so now my skills are no longer in demand. It is, I have to say, I like having the consistency and the ability to predict what work will be like for me today. In a way that as an athlete, you kind of have to roll with the punches, and it's interesting, but it's probably best reserved for someone in their youth.
Yeah. No, I agree. So what do you miss about the game? Do you miss anything? Is there any kind of?
I miss the camaraderie.
Yeah.
I miss sort of joking. Like, listen, there's no greater way to sort of do away with the veil of social interaction with people than by spending all the time with them.
Yeah.
By taking showers with them.
Yeah.
It's sort of like every sort of interaction you have with people is just genuine, right?
Yeah.
Because either you are on a team and you know where the other person's coming from, or you're otherwise in this sort of community of athletes. So I sort of miss that style of connecting with people. I miss come an adrenaline rush. I do sort of miss that. Just this, who knows what situation I'm going to be called into today? Who knows when my name will be called?
Yeah.
And I have to do this thing, with all my effort, my whole body effort, whole concentration. You don't really get a whole lot of that as in one's job. So I do miss that. But that's about it. That's truly about it.
Yeah.
I don't miss being an athlete. I don't miss that lifestyle. It's nice to have a workplace. I was talking about camaraderie in a workplace that also has women.
Yeah.
It's nice to have this experience now. So I don't miss that sort of very male experience. And yeah, I guess I don't really miss baseball, baseball as an entity that I am a part of. I recognize it as something that I did and was interesting and enjoyed, but I don't really identify with it anymore. I don't sort of hold a property interest, if you like, in it. I just sort of miss being around other people who are going through this weird experience.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
No, and that's that's the camaraderie thing is so much different on the outside. Like you hit it on the head. There are people that you're going through this, like you said, this bizarre, weird experience. It's shared. There's struggle. There's positive feedback. There's a ton of negative feedback. And then all of a sudden, it's not there anymore. And
right.
I think some guys they miss that part, but they can easily compartmentalize out and be like that. Love that part, but the rest of it wasn't for me. And I think other guys struggle with it. I think I'm right in the middle.
Okay.
I do miss that a little bit. I miss the working towards a goal with a group of people. And that's, I think, one of the biggest reasons why I coach. It's like you're trying to do something great, as minuscule as it is, because it's high school baseball, it's college baseball. But, trying to do something great with a group of people. I mean, I think that's the thing. Do you get that with Uber right now? Like when
I
you're
do.
working?
Yeah, I am very lucky. I love my job. I'm a lawyer to a relatively small. I'm the manager of a relatively small legal team, and we advise another, relatively small team. Just the way the company organizes its sort of mobility operations, that's sort of like the rides business, the transit business. Sort of split it up by region, and the Northeast region, is headquartered here in New York City, and my team advises the Northeast region. And so, I have a meeting with my full team. It's 5 of us, or the public affairs policy sort of lobbyist team. There's 6 of them, and the business, the city operations team that I advise on a day-to-day basis. I think there are like 12 to 15 of them, you
Yeah.
know, so everybody's sort of near, and what we need to get done frequently is all hands on deck, needed to be done yesterday,
Yeah.
you know, and it is sort of fun to have that experience, because it does feel like it's hitting on. That's probably the number one reason
Yeah.
why I say I love my job. It hits on that element that you were describing. We are all in this together, trying to work this out. You know, frequently my job is really just to be like, okay, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
You know, or okay, no, someone fix that, because I'm not going to debase myself to a regulator by explaining this. You know, so it feels very like I'm part of a team effort on a day-to-day basis, and that is really nice. I didn't get that at a law firm. You know, I worked at a very large law firm. I was very expensive. I was $800 an hour.
Oh my
you know, so I couldn't like tie my shoes on the client's dime.
Yeah.
You know, so and it just all felt very, very large.
Yeah.
You know, and unknowable. But this is different. Even though Uber is a large company and we're doing more than the company ever probably thought it could do, my role and my immediate team and responsibilities is sort of small, and it feels like a team effort.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Jay, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, man, but what was life like as a gay athlete? I mean, it's like you mentioned earlier, it's like you didn't start being gay in 2000 when you came out. It was the whole time. And so what was the experience like? You know, and do you feel like people, if they knew, would have cared?
So I guess I'm of the mind that people had to have known something. I mean, I think the mere fact that I read books suggested this guy's off, you know, or would have a pithy rejoinder to anything that someone said about a woman's body part. So I think people knew, especially when you think of the sort of prejudice and bias people have towards Black men, sort of over-sexualizing them. And so the mere fact that this guy is out womanizing, he's single. So I think that probably already introduced an element of curiosity. But it was I don't know. The hardest thing was not being an athlete. The hardest thing was just being on the road all the time and not being able to put down roots and having to meet people on the internet. And not in like a good way, like a weird way. And you know, like only a third of the people you have take showers with are attractive, you know, and so it had its challenges.
I think a third is being generous.
I did too, right?
What's that Seinfeld line? Only 10% of people are attractive. That's
yeah, exactly. And like there are many baseball players who will make you question your homosexuality once you see them without clothes on. And so I don't know. I think it was a challenge because it's not like I think as a straight person I would have found any greater sense of community. I don't think I socialized with my teammates any differently than I would have. I don't think I made friends any differently than I would have if I were straight. It's just the challenge was doing the gay thing, trying to find other gay people. In a profession where you just didn't really get that opportunity. You work weird hours. You're always at the ballpark, and you are every day is like a getaway day. And so that was a real challenge. And I think as I look back, it was a challenge that I didn't appreciate at the time to just ignore a part of myself, ignore developing a way to interact with people, to be sort of tacitly dishonest with people was a challenge, I think. By sort of letting people assume that I'm straight or something, probably had this sort of challenge, or probably presented the same issue as seemed like sort of Chinese water torture, just like on a day-to-day basis, this sort of dishonesty that I find myself living in is a hardship, but not even paying attention to the hardship. But I think now, looking back, I see that.
Yeah, did you feel that at all, just on a day-to-day basis, like having to kind of put on a different face for the clubhouse, so to speak?
I think, but it's just hard for me to, like, it just seems all, like, irreducibly bound up into all the things that I didn't get out of life as a baseball player. I would have loved to.
Totally makes sense.
You know what I mean? I would have loved to have talked about that Jonathan Franzen essay with my colleagues, but I can't because I'm a baseball player.
Nobody even knows who Jonathan Franzen is, man.
Right? At the same time, I would love to be doing the sort of things that I do at my apartment now, but no one was really, my teammates weren't into that sort of thing. So it was just another thing I couldn't really talk about.
Yeah.
Sort of another sort of aspect of my life. But I think if people knew, would they have treated me any differently? I don't know. I don't know. I do tend to look back at my time in baseball as a live and let live culture.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, do your own thing in your locker if you want to. Hang out with people, your small cohort of people as much as you want to. Certainly in a bullpen, that's a just sort of inherent friendship.
Yep.
It's like going on a road trip with dudes every day of the week.
Yep.
And that was cool. So I don't think that any of that would have changed. And then I just think back, there are people I played baseball, they were way gayer than I was. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know who they are trying to fool. But they didn't make enemies, right? And I'm sure my teammates were seeing the same sort of behaviors that I was seeing.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have the eye that I had. But yeah, I just would be inclined to think that, like, look, if you can come in and get people out, or if, like, you can come in and get this double play that we need here, that sort of is the cure. Like, that's all we care about. That's all this is about.
I would agree on that. I feel like there are a lot of teammates that I didn't necessarily get along with or were close friends with, but if they were coming in and they're striking somebody out with the bases loaded in a game we needed, we're right there. Like, we are boys. It's funny between the lines how quickly I always go back to, like, brawls. You can not like half your team, but as soon as a brawl starts, like, everybody is pulling on the same end of the rope.
Yeah.
And everybody's out of the bullpen, and if you weren't a part of it, you were like, hey man, no, this is what we do. Like, we back each other up, and it's interesting. That's the deal. Like, there's some qualitarian to it. So
yeah, you don't even it doesn't even have to be discussed. Like, we're on the same team. Whatever it takes to sort of look out for your teammates, whatever the situation is, just something that we've all sort of consented to. Like, we're all down for that.
Yeah.
We're teammates. Yeah, for sure.
No, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. So, do you watch baseball at all? Is it totally dead, or is it still a little bit part of your life?
I had the totally dead a couple of years, right when I stopped playing.
Yeah.
A big part of it is, like, so much of my life was just school.
Yeah.
But I think it's sort of like my third year of law school, maybe second or third year of law school, when I sort of was able to look up and be like, actually, after this law school thing, I'm going to have a really nice job.
Yeah.
And, like, I can see the fruits of my labor. I can sort of go back to figuring out what I like to do. I started watching a little more baseball.
Yeah.
And I still very much like watching baseball. It's very popular among lawyers. And it's a very good sport for practicing law. You can have it on the TV while you're working. And it's a great thing to do with friends, to go to a game in the summer. So yeah, I very much enjoy watching baseball. I don't really follow it. I just sort of like watching baseball.
Like wallpaper and stuff.
Yeah. I might not know who is good until around August.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't really follow who is, like, a prospect or who is, like, but I watch quite a bit of it, where I can. And I like it. It doesn't do anything for me, when I watch a baseball game. It's just I see it as, I used to do that, and I know a lot about it. I can see all the subtlety, but it doesn't really animate anything inside of me.
That's awesome. I think a lot of people would love to be at that point. I mean, do you think that's something that was it the transition out? I mean, did you like how were you able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I needed the detox those couple of years of not paying any attention to it at all. And I found other things to pay attention to.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that has sort of helped me get over whatever I needed to get over with baseball, because I just found a new and different thing to try to pursue. And I like what I'm pursuing. I like what I do now.
Yeah.
And so I guess I feel more at home. I feel when I look back at baseball, I think, well, that's something I needed to do with my body and those abilities at that time of my life. But that time of my life is over and done with. I'm too old to do that now anyway. So, you know, so yeah, no real sense of loss or grief in any way. It's just a thing I know I'm going to have to talk to when I'm, meet someone, at work for the first time,
exactly.
or so on.
Or around playoff time, they're going to ask your opinion on which team's going to win and who's going to be in the World Series. And
this day and age, people don't ask opinions, and people don't care about expertise. They'll just share their. They'll just tell me what so and so should have done. Obviously, and so I have to hear those out.
Yeah,
all the time.
I know. Aren't those the best?
Yeah. It's like, oh, and I'm always like, yeah, sure, you could try and steal third there with 2 outs and
exactly.
and a 2-0 count. Yeah, sure, that's a great idea.
Yeah, exactly. Just move along, sir.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. I appreciate you doing this. I know you got a lot going on, and but it's good seeing you. Good talking to you again.
It's good seeing you. It's good talking to you.
It's like one of those things where, again, I go back to like you're with somebody every day, and like you're such a part of their life, and then it's gone. But this is cool. For me, this is doing these conversations is one of the huge upsides is get to kind of reconnect with people that were such a big part of your life, and you don't get to see as much anymore. So I'm glad you're doing well, man.
Yeah.
Miss you.
Thank you. I'm glad you're doing this. Thank you for thinking of me. I similarly get it's good to connect with you. It's good to see you. I am a phone conversation type of person, more than sort of text messaging, for the same reasons you just described. Is why you like doing this. So this really hits on. This really pulls on sort of my heartstrings to do this. So
that's awesome.
Happy to do it.
So it's funny too. Really quickly, that's why I like podcasts. Like I'd listen to interviews when I was, driving somewhere, and it was 8 minutes, and it was extremely surface. Like, how's the team looking? Who's the next opponent? How do you match up with that opponent? Thanks for coming on. And it's like there's no depth to that interview at all. It's just like, all right, what's going on this week? But the podcast thing, I feel like, takes so many different shapes, and you can like get to real conversation. It's not just
no doubt.
Hey, how's Nebraska looking versus Iowa this week? It's like, oh, great, yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
that'll be
I completely agree.
So
completely agree.
Cool, man. Awesome. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.